a Wicked Sobriety production. Welcome to the Dirtbag Adventures Podcast, an in-depth interview-style podcast about outdoor recreation by Wicked Sobriety Productions, hosted by me, Derek Kern. Listen now for free wherever you get your podcasts, links in the show notes. Dirtbag Adventures Podcast, Introductory episode. So as you just heard in the introduction there, the podcast is going to be an in-depth interview style podcast. However, I am going to be recording some solo episodes. Those solo episodes are going to be kind of true crime related. I have a you could call it passion for true crime, cold case, files, disappearances, things of that nature. So I thought it'd be kind of interesting to combine two things that I like, which is the outdoors and true crime. And how I'm going to do that is on the solo shows, I'm going to bring to light some murders and also some disappearances that have specifically happened along the Appalachian Trail. Some of the murders and disappearances people probably know about because they've been extremely mainstream because of how they happened or who it happened to. However, there's a handful, or more than a handful, there's quite a few actually that aren't so mainstream that a lot of people probably don't know about. I mean, I've been hiking for over 10 years. I've hiked a lot of miles on the AT, and some of the murders that I was finding when I pulled up the info is I had no idea about. So we'll be putting that in. The podcast is going to be all things outdoors. It's going to be hiking, hunting, fishing, kayaking involving kayak camping, wreck boating or flat water, and of course whitewater. It's going to involve, we'll talk about shooting, target shooting, clay shooting, and just for fun shooting. By just for fun, I mean kind of competition, 3-gun, or just kind of willy-nilly out in your backyard shooting trees, if that's what you find fun. We're also going to cover Jeeps, trucks, off-road, remote control cars, mountain biking, road cycling, motorcycles, hard enduro, trials bikes, boats. Anyways, all things outdoors. If it can be done outdoors, we're probably going to talk about it at some point over the course of the different guests that I'm going to have on this show. The name Dirtbag Adventures is a name that's been around with me and the things that I've been doing for probably the better part of going on, I don't know, close to 15 years now, I suppose. It all started on Instagram. I had a personal Instagram. My Instagram handle at the time was just my name, like D Kern. And I started getting into some things that we're going to go over here in a little bit. And that's when the Instagram handle got changed to Dirtbagger. And then a few years later after that, I got into some other things that caused me to buy a camera and start recording, make a YouTube channel, which is when I created the YouTube channel is when the name Dirtbag Adventures became a thing, and then Instagram got changed to Dirtbag Adventures, and then of course now the Dirtbag Adventure podcast exists. And so the idea or the scope of the podcast is to take all of these things that I've done over the last 15 years. A lot of the people I've met I'm still friends with, or I still talk to on occasion. And they are all badasses. They all are badasses in their own rights by how they do things or how they've progressed in their hobby or sport or passion. And I want to sit them down. I want to have a talk with them. I want to know, hey, man, why did you get into this stuff? And what pushed you to be better every single day? And, just kind of let them tell their story. And as they're telling their story, I'm sure we will share stories of doing things together. So you'll get a chance to hear a little bit about me as these interviews start taking place. As far as scheduling goes, I'm looking at a 2 interview per month episode rate. So I'm aiming to release 1 interview at the middle of the month and then 1 interview at the end of the month. And then the week in between the 2 interviews is when I aim to release the solo podcast that I plan on doing. This is the goal for now. As time moves on and I figure out exactly how busy I'm going to be with all this, things may change. I kind of burnt myself out with YouTube last year with all the content that I was putting out, and I don't want to do that with the podcast. So if it gets to be too much, I'm just going to cut back to the 2 interview episodes per month, once in the middle, once at the end. I'll just cut out the solo podcasting thing altogether. And so now that you know about the podcast, why it was named, what it's going to feature, what the schedule is going to be like, I'm going to kind of give you a little bit of history about me, just so that you as the listeners can kind of know, like, okay, this guy is talking about something that he has lived, that he's done, that he's participated in. And so I'm not going to go real deep into my history, but I'm going to kind of hit the high points. And to start it out, I'm going to go all the way back to my childhood. Let's say pre-8 years of age. I was introduced to hunting and fishing by my grandfather on my mom's side. And I don't know, I guess probably around 3. And between like age 3 and age 6, age 7, I went hunting with him many different times. He took me fishing many different times, mostly trout fishing, but we did do a handful of striper fishing. So he is probably the guy responsible for my love of the outdoors in general, since he was the very first impression on me into the outdoors. Unfortunately, he got ill when I was around 7, 8 years old. He had COPD and emphysema real bad, and that was kind of the last things that I ever did. He was never able to take me fishing or hunting after he got sick. Between the age of like 7, 8 years old to the age of like 15, I didn't really do anything concerning the outdoors. I played outside or whatever as normal kids do, but as far as hunting, fishing, those kind of things, my dad was never into hunting or fishing, and I didn't really have any other father-like figures in my life at the time that would take me or anything like that, so I just never did it. Now, when I got old enough to drive, I bought my first car. That's kind of when everything started kicking back off. I would go with a lot of my high school friends to a local spot here in North Georgia called Dawson Forest. Dawson Forest is a 10,000 acre WMA. A lot of you are probably not going to be familiar with Dawson Forest, but if you're not, Dawson Forest was a nuclear facility back in the 50s. They were trying to supposedly build a prototype nuclear aircraft. It shut down. The Atlanta airport, Hartsfield-Jackson, was going to come in and buy the property and build an airport there. There's too many underground bunkers, so they just turned it into a WMA. Over the years, they've tested it with Geiger meters and stuff to make sure that it's safe for everybody to go out there. So it's a big place. There's hunting opportunities, camping opportunities, hiking opportunities, a lot of horseback out there, mountain bikes. So as a teenager, being able to drive, I spent a lot of time out there. I've gotten into some trouble out there, but that was when things really started kicking back off for me, getting back into the outdoor world. And this type of camping that I'm talking about wasn't, tent camping on the side of the lake. This was like miles out into the woods on Forest Service Road, nobody around, 20 miles to the nearest town, in the cold, in the hot, it didn't matter. We were out there, what at the time I would consider roughing it. Fast forward to 2014, I bought a Jeep, had the Jeep for a few months, was trying to find some local trails to ride. I ended up meeting up with a group of other let's just say Jeepers. Ended up finding out a couple lived in the same town as me. After a while, we became pretty decent friends. We started a local Jeep club that's now gotten pretty big. We started hosting events at the local restaurants, had some flex ramps brought in. We were going on, we would have days where we would get like 30 or 40 Jeeps together and go and ride off-road trails. That kind of got me into overlanding. Did a lot of overlanding style camping out of the Jeep, had a rack and extra fuel and all that kind of stuff. Predominantly though, what I did in the Jeep was rougher off-roading style, broke a lot of things, had to fix a lot of things, which is kind of ultimately what's pushed me away from the Jeeps now. Is just, it's not worth the hassle. But this is the event that I described earlier that got me to change my Instagram from my personal name to the name that would later become Dirtbag Adventures, which was Dirtbagger. Now the name Dirtbagger has a story in of itself that's for a later time, but Dirtbagger stuck, and I was, like I mentioned, I was posting pictures of all the Jeep expeditions and things we were doing to my Instagram. And it stayed Dirtbagger up until the point that I created YouTube. Also in 2000, let's go back a little bit. 2016, I totaled my Jeep. At the beginning of 2017, I bought a Silverado, full-size, a 2010 four-door full-size Chevy Silverado with a camper shell lifted and all that. Built a camper in the bed with slide-out drawers and stuff. I made an off-road trailer. So we had a camper set up in the bed of the truck. We had an off-road trailer that would pull behind the truck that had a camper set up in it. Did a lot of traveling all over the Southeast with this setup, from the beaches down in Florida up to the very mountains of the Blue Ridge Parkway, up around Mount Mitchell and stuff. I also bought a 2008 KLR 650 right around the time I bought my truck. I started building that into an adventure bike, eventually got it fully outfitted. Then at the end of 2017, I got sober after 20 years of alcoholism. I went stone cold sober on Halloween Day. And then because of my motorcycle, my KLR that I bought, and my brother, I was introduced to my really good friend, and he introduced me. We went on a ride together, like a 2 or 3 day trip up on the Blue Ridge Parkway, motorcycle camping. Kind of hit it off. He ended up introducing me into rock climbing, which then the following summer, he ended up introducing me to whitewater kayaking. Whitewater kayaking is kind of where the rest of this takes off. I fell extremely hard into whitewater kayaking. I bought all kinds of boats, all kinds of gear, and part of that gear was I bought my first action camera, which was a GoPro, and I started recording myself initially to see what I was doing wrong and my technique with my roll. Once I figured my roll out, I started using the camera to film different rivers I was running, and then that kind of changed. Then that went from filming my kayaking adventures into filming everything that I did, from hunting to fishing to kayaking, kayak camping. I mean, basically everything I was filming, and it was making content for YouTube. I was having a fun time with it. Got my kids involved. I taught myself around this time. I was in the middle of teaching myself the skill of running a trap line. And by running a trap line, I mean all the way to the finished product, which is tanning hides. So I did that for 2 seasons. Also, in the process of doing all this, I killed my first ever deer. I was 30 years old. It was a 4-point buck. I had my sister's husband come and teach me how to skin and clean it. I had an idea because of running the trap line, but I just kind of wanted a little bit of guidance on where to cut the meat and such. So he came up and showed me how to clean it and skin it. And then I bought all the processing equipment, and that was the first ever deer that I shot and the first ever deer that I processed on my own. So that was another skill I taught myself. In between all of these things, I was doing a lot of trout fishing. I still do a lot of trout fishing. There's a lot of really good trout streams here in North Georgia, and they are year round now. So you can literally go fish anytime you want for trout. In the last year or so, I got into snorkeling at local creeks and rivers for river treasure. Got my kids involved with this. They really enjoyed it. Just in the last couple months, I've bought a mountain bike, started shredding at a lot of the local single track around here. They've really made improvements on mountain bike trails in North Georgia. They've doubled or tripled the amount of places we have to ride in the last probably 8 to 10 years. And then that kind of brings us right up to where we're at right now, which is the podcast. At the beginning of 2022, I set a goal for myself to put out a video per week, every week of the year on my YouTube channel, Dirtbag Adventures. About July of this year in 2022, me and the wife bought a house. Things went sideways as far as being able to get out and get content and stuff. It became very hard. I was between moving and working on the new house and still working a full-time job, and then still making time to get out and get the content was very, I don't want to say stressful because I enjoyed every minute of it, but it was a lot of work. And so as the year started fading out into the fall, I kind of started asking myself, like, what are we going to do next year? Do I really want to continue on with making that much content on YouTube, or do I want to try to get into something else? And then, I knew about podcasts. I listen to podcasts all the time, have been for probably the last 10 years, but I hadn't ever gave doing the podcast thing on my own a thought. Then a coworker said he had started a podcast, and he was telling me all about it. And it did 2 things. 1, it made me want to do it myself, but 2, it also kind of turned me off from doing it myself because of all the things that he was telling me he was having to go through and how long it was taking him. And so the further into the fall and winter it got, the more I decided that this is the route that I wanted to go for 2023. I like learning. I like hearing people's stories. And so the podcast made sense. Bring people on who you don't know, who can tell you about their outdoor stories or their adventures or why they're there, what they're doing. So that's kind of where we're at right now. You're hearing it firsthand. So I think I'm going to kind of wrap it up here. I didn't want to drag this out too long since it is just the introductory episode to kind of give all you listeners an idea of what you're going to get with the upcoming episodes. And as I mentioned, you're going to get to hear a lot more in-depth stories about me and my adventures as this podcast moves forward, whether it's with other guests or whether I just come on here and say, okay, today I'm going to do a solo podcast, and I'm going to pick this story, and I'm just going to tell you this story because I have a lot of them. Like I said, that's going to wrap it all up for the introduction into what the Dirtbag Adventures Podcast is going to be about. All right, man, before we close this out, I have a favor to ask from the audience. One, could you please be sure you subscribe to the podcast on whatever platform you're listening so that you can receive all new episodes right when they're released. And then if you could, go ahead and head over to iTunes or the Apple Podcast app and leave a review. Man, tell us what you enjoyed or what we could do better. Offer up a guest recommendation, etc. This will help tremendously in letting Apple know that people are actually enjoying the content, and it will help us be put into the search engines or recommended more often in the search engines. And lastly, Dirtbag Adventures is on several social platforms, including YouTube. Really, the best way to reach this content is by going to www.dirtbagadventurespodcast.buzzsprout.com. And then once you're on the website, you'll see the podcast episodes down at the bottom in chronological order. And then at the top of the homepage, you'll find all of the social links for the other various platforms that Dirtbag Adventures is on. And thank you again for joining me in this episode of the Dirtbag Adventures Podcast. Catch you on the next one.